Hello and welcome back to the channel. I have a very special guest with me today. The first time she was on, she brought a champion with her, and he kind of told us to shut up and write a book. This time, she's bringing an army, and they might teach you how to write romantasy in the process. Jenna Moreci, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I hope you don't mind. I brought a guest appearance.
The star of the show.
Yeah, so she'll be here. Thank you, Butters. Thank you. She'll be here snoozing on my lap.
Well, I mean, she is the star of the show, so of course she's gonna show up.
Right.
But as we were talking there for a minute backstage, release week is coming to an end. Where are your energy levels at, and how much caffeine and what drinks are you currently absorbing into your body?
Non-existent energy. Yesterday, I just stayed in bed pretty much all day. I was just a lazy blob. I purposely tried to plan my schedule so that after the release week, I can just relax for the rest of March and just have like a very chill. I mean, there are certain things like, obligations that you can't avoid, but for the most part, like business wise, just chill and relax. So that's my goal for the rest of the month, is to just do as little as possible.
Just woo-sa.
Yes.
Well, what has been the funnest thing? I know, releasing books. Even now, I mean, you've released what, 5 now? I think
6.
6, yeah, 6 with So, and I've released several, and it's like, you never get used to how much it's going to kind of drain you down.
Yes.
But what's the funnest thing that you've had happen this week in regards to the book release, or something an early reviewer or a fan has said?
I think I would say 2 things. This is something that is always exciting with every book release, is the fan art. And so just having like my inbox flooded with like, oh, look, this is a scene from the Savior's Army. I'm like, yay, thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, that always makes my day. So that's been really, really exciting, is seeing all the fan art and everything and being able to share it on social media. The other thing was, there is one scene in the Savior's Army where I had planned it for a really long time, and it was just one of those things where it's like, this has got to happen. I'm making it so. It's a funny scene. And then when I went to write it, I had one of those moments where I'm like, well, maybe it's only funny to me. Like,
yes,
maybe this is dumb. But then when I had beta readers and critique partners and my editors, everyone was like, this scene is hysterical. OMG. Like, they just loved it. And so I felt like, okay, good. Like, it's not just me, this is a good scene. And what's been so fun is, now that people are finishing the book, everyone who's messaging me about it, they're all messaging me about that scene. And so I'm like, yay, it worked. The humor worked. So if you guys, I affectionately refer to the scene as the tripping balls scene. So, but which when you read that scene, it'll make sense.
Oh my goodness. I love that when you're getting into it and you're having a great time writing the scene, and then you're about halfway through or towards the end, you're like, is this only fun to me?
Right.
This is too good. Like, am I just like having fun with myself here while I write this?
Right.
I love that. And I always like to ask this question. It's like, what, without, of course we don't want to do too spoilery here, but like, was there a scene or a chapter even that was just like, wow, this is the hard one to write for, and it could be for any reason. Like, did you have a chapter that was like extra hard to write, or a scene?
The climax of the novel it's probably the longest chapter, and it's just like battle after battle after battle. And I get a lot of praise for how I write fight scenes, which is very nice. But for me, they're still very hard to write, and so it's just like, oh, like I was writing it like, why did I do this to myself? Like, why did I have so many fight scenes in this chapter? But it was really well received and everything, so it was worth it. But it was one of those where when I had to sit down and write the climax, I was just like, okay, this is going to take me like a week to write, and I just have to like grit my teeth and suck it up, you know.
I don't know if that is always the case. I'm trying to think back to the other two books. Almost that's always the case, but for me, it is like always the case that, except for this last book I wrote, is that the last chapter is always the longest chapter. It's always like, let's get it all out there. It's almost twice as long as my average chapters. You know, I don't know if that's how you plan it, or if that's the way it always happens to you.
That happens to me a lot, and I think it's because it's, you know, the conflict comes to a head, and typically if you're writing that moment, it has to be, you know, it has to be the most dire situation in the book, so you have to include a lot of elements like them almost failing and then them rallying, and there's just so many elements to include that it ends up becoming the longest chapter, and it's just like, this is so hard.
You're like, why am I'm still writing this the climax after 2 weeks? Yeah, it's like, oh my goodness, got to make it right. But yeah, I guess and Alphasaurus has a question here. It's like, were there any reactions that you weren't expecting to any of your scenes or your characters?
I'm thinking so far everything has been what I expected. I don't want to be a mean, or there was one reaction that I got that wasn't like, it surprised me in its intensity. There's one character in the book, I don't want to spoil anything, Leftysaurus might be able to put it together. There's one character in the book who is kind of being a pain in the ass for most of the book. She's sort of getting in the middle of Tobias and Leila's relationship, and you know, she's not very likable. Like I didn't write her to be sympathetic. You can kind of understand where she's coming from, but it's still like, lady, shut up, you know. But at the end, she apologizes and admits fault, and you know, begins the path of trying to mend fences, and it's certainly not mended, you know, but she starts on that path, you know. And I did have one person react to her at the apology, like, I don't care, I don't believe her, I hate her, I hope she dies, you know. And and they reacted so strongly, like with hatred toward her, more than like the people in the book who are like murdering people. And so I was like, okay, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I totally get that. I mean, I'll even have that reaction sometimes when I'm reading. Like some horrific things will have happened like 2 chapters before, and then something that I just find odd they do just gets to me, and I'm like, a whole village just got annihilated over here, and I'm fixated on why you did this little thing to you. Like, why did you cut your body over here for some weird reason?
Right.
Yeah, so I can definitely understand that. And I mean, and that's one thing that's different about this book is you have a lot of traveling that happens in this book. Was that always the plan? Were you always like, okay, we're moving, we're getting away, we're, you know?
Yeah. It's been very exciting, and I've been sort of having to like just wait, because I had this whole world plan, but for the first 2 books they're underground, you know, so you don't get to see any of it. So I already knew there would be a lot of traveling in this book, and I was excited and intimidated to write it, because you know, traveling can be hard. It can be very like, you can fall into patterns of making it really boring, where it's like, they walked and walked some more, you know. So but it was exciting because I finally get to be like, look at, this is what Thesson looks like, this is what Kovar looks like, this is what Trigolia looks like, and stuff. So it was always the plan, but it was both, you know, it was exciting and intimidating to write.
And you've been You haven't been inactive. Like we have people like people will miss with like George R. R. Martin because he's been like 13 years out of the game. And then some people will say the same thing about like Jim Butcher, but he's actually doing other side projects. It's mainly like the Dresden people that are just like, why do we have to wait so long for this? Why are you doing other stuff? But you've been super active writing multiple. You're getting more into because you started off kind of the author tuber that can. I mean, even I was one of the first people was jumping on when I was learning how to write. I was learning a lot from you and the publishing industry and and stuff. And now you've kind of stepped full force into that off of just YouTube, and now you're in bookstores with your Shut Up and Write the Book, and now the Romantasy book. And I just love that for you to kind of get out there. Was it different from writing your Shut Up and Write the Book to How to Write Romantasy? What was the difference between the two?
Well, Shut Up and Write the Book was independently published, and How to Write Romantasy was traditionally published. So that right there was a very different experience because it was my first experience with a traditional publisher. But I think with How to Write Romantasy, I was a lot more confident. When I wrote Shut Up and Write the Book, it was my very first nonfiction book, and I felt very like, I don't know what I'm doing, even though you start writing it and you're like, oh, I do know what I'm doing. This is basically like preparing a YouTube video, except it's super long, So when I wrote How to Write Romantasy, it was very very intuitive, and it was I just kind of breezed through it. That was the quickest book I've ever written in my life. I felt very confident writing it. I felt like I knew what I was doing. And it was nice because I had a whole team around me, who, if I had any questions, I could just shoot them a question. Whereas with Shut Up and Write the Book, if I had a question, I had to Google and just try and figure it out and stuff. And so it was probably the easiest book I've written thus far because of the traditional publishing aspect, as well as the fact that I felt a lot more confident in my capabilities to write nonfiction. And also Romantasy is something I've been obsessed with since I was a kid. Before it was called Romantasy, but when it was just fantasy romance, so it was a topic that I already knew a lot about. So it's basically just me, for however many pages gushing about one of my favorite topics. It's like, okay, guys, stop and listen. We're going to talk about my favorite genre,
Well, and that's been a big thing is, since the Savior's Champion came out, like Romantasy has just exploded. I mean, it has become, there's controversies about it, like it's taking over fantasy, blah, blah, and all these things. And that had always made me think back to, I'm like, yeah, she was writing it before it became like the thing to write. How has that changed? Now I know it's changed your covers, right? So how has that changed your writing at all?
I wouldn't say it's changed the writing itself. It's made it a lot easier to market the series. I will say that it's changed the marketing because when I first started releasing these books, no matter how before Romantasy wasn't a term yet, so I would just say these are fantasy romance books, fantasy romance. And no matter how many times I said that, people would still think it was fantasy with a romantic subplot. And I cannot tell you how many reviews I got that said, I liked this book, but there was too much romance. And people would be like, it's a romance novel. That's the point, So now it's been so much easier to market it because I say Romantasy or fantasy romance and people immediately know what I'm talking about. So I would say that element has helped a lot. Like, thank you, Romantasy, for becoming a term. In terms of the writing itself, I wouldn't say, there's the normal growth that you experience over time as a writer. So, my writing has changed in that way. But I wouldn't say that my writing has changed specifically because Romantasy has become a big thing. There are certain trends that are really popular in Romantasy that I could hop on, because they are trending, but they are not really my favorite thing to write. So might not be the best business decision. I could be writing shadow daddies, but I'm not into shadow daddies. So, so I'm not writing them. So there are decisions that I could be making because Romantasy is the big thing right now. I'm just not really into it. So I'm not doing it. But yeah, I would say the change in my writing has mostly just been like organic growth.
Yeah. Well, and Were you sitting on the Savior's Army for a while? I know. Had you already started it right away at,
Yes.
or were you okay? So it was like little here, until you
Yeah.
finally got enough time. It wasn't like I'm just going to wait until I have the time.
No, I had been starting it since before the Savior Sister came out. My husband is disabled. He has a spinal cord injury, and it's one of those things when you have a spinal cord injury, because the spinal cord, pretty much controls everything in the
Everything.
body and the whole, all your nervous system and everything. It's one of those things where it creates a million other problems. And so I released The Savior Sister in 2020. And from 2020 to 2025, my husband experienced a series of really debilitating medical problems. And so basically, I would start working on the Savior's Army, and then we'd be in the hospital. And so I'd have to pause. And then he'd come out of the hospital. I'd start working on the Savior's Army. We're back in the hospital. And it just became this series of, getting to write a couple chapters and then stopping. And then it got to a point where things were so chaotic with his medical situation that writing this story that covers PTSD and CPTSD and battles and bloodshed, it was becoming, like I'm dealing with trauma in the real world. And then now I got to write the trauma. And so that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to put the Savior's Army aside for, a year or two and write some nonfiction books. And so that for me was sort of a palate cleanser to allow myself to sort of heal from what was going on in my real life. And then once that was, improving, my husband is doing a lot better now. Once that was improving and I had the nonfiction books out, I was able to go back to the Savior's Army and not feel so triggered by writing the content. And we weren't in and out of the hospital all the time while I was writing, and I was finally able to finish it. And so, it was one of those things where life happened, like medical problems happened. And that's why I released the 2 nonfiction books, is because I was like, this is something I can write without, getting sucked into the trauma of it all,
Yeah, like just a nice release.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you finally put that last period on the Savior's Army, did you feel like a weight had came off of you and you're like, I got it, it's here?
Yes. There was a point where I was like, I don't know if I'll ever finish this book, because things just kept happening, and this was one of the hardest books. This was the hardest book I've ever had to write, because there were so many firsts. This was my first dual point of view novel. This was my first novel with a split timeline where some of the chapters are in the future, some of the chapters are in the present, This is my first book where they're traveling. And then on top of that, I'm exploring these themes of PTSD and CPTSD. And so I just got to a point where I was like, this is the hardest book I ever had to write. And I'm writing it during the hardest time of my life. And I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to finish this. So when I finally finished it, it was just like, oh, I can't believe it. I was just so relieved more than anything. Like, yes, I did it. Suck
like,
it.
You won. Yeah.
Right.
I was about to say, you feel like you won. You're like,
exactly.
I beat you. I got it.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a big win. It's always good to have a big win in life. When you're just like, life's been beating me down here for a while and I got to win.
Exactly. So it was a huge relief. I was just at that point, I was just glad. It's like, this could sell 0 copies, but at least it's done.
Oh, well, it looks like Noman has a question for us. Like, what were your favorite bits about world building outside of Thesson Palace? Now, I know you hate world building, right? You are a hater of world building, is what I hear on the streets.
I made one comment years ago, and I did not fully explain myself, and it has haunted me ever since. I don't hate world building. I hate the scenes. Okay, I have since learned this. At the time that I said this, I didn't realize they were called transition scenes. I hate the transition scenes where you have to set the scene and ground the reader in the moment. I hate writing those scenes where you ground the reader in the moment, and in those scenes you usually have to do a bit of world building. I hate writing transition scenes, but I said I hate the world building scenes because I didn't know they were called transition scenes, and ever since that has haunted me for my entire life, that everyone thinks I hate world building as a whole. And it's like, I don't hate world building. I just don't like writing those transitions because they're boring to write. But anyway, but I will say world building is not my favorite part of the writing process, but I don't hate it. Yes. So my favorite bits about world building, it's always going to be the culture and customs. I like, I like the pretty clothes. I like, the jewelry. I like the holidays and, the religious practices, and then like what separates our world from this world, like for example, in Thesson, your sexuality is not a social identifier. There aren't terms like gay, straight, or anything like that because it doesn't really matter in that world. So it's things like that. That's what I enjoy the most. I think the world building scenes that I enjoyed the most in the Savior's Army were the brothel scene, which there's a scene where they enter a brothel, and that is a lot of world building because you see that like our world has a very different opinion of sex workers than this world. In this world they're very respected and it's just a normal 9 to 5, and things like that, and you see like they end up using the brothel as a sanctuary. This is like a safe place for them. It's like all these people are getting it on, but they're like, yay, we're safe in this brothel with all these sex workers who are taking care of us and making us comfortable. And then another part is when they travel to Trigolia, they experience one of the Trigolian holidays, which is called the Festival of Pleasures. And that was just so much fun to write. I pulled a lot of influence from real world holidays and things like that. And I don't want to go into too many details, but it's fun. Those are my favorite parts about world building is how society has grown and their customs and what they believe in and how they celebrate.
Well, yeah, and I kind of do the same. Like people like because I have like this world underneath the real world, kind of like the Dresden Files. And people like when I go into that world and it's like, oh, show you all the cool stuff. But my favorite thing is when like a leader or something is doing something and then they notice a kind of a nobody out and then they just like say something to them. Where like it lets you know the character a little bit more, that they do pay attention to people who aren't somebody, and I think that draws you closer to the characters and stuff. And speaking of that, so how are you approaching Tobias's, his evolution, his mental health evolution through the Savior's Army?
Well, that's where a lot of the PTSD comes into play. His mental health is a big part of the Savior's Army. I wouldn't say it's the main focus. It's going to become a lot more prevalent in the Savior's War. But basically, we see how much the Sovereigns Tournament has messed him up, and he's realizing it too. Everyone around him can see it more than he can, but as the story progresses, he's seeing it more and more and realizing like, what's wrong with me? He's becoming a lot more impulsive, a lot more act first, think later.
Yep.
A lot of nightmares and that sort of thing. I have CPTSD, so it's very easy to write this stuff because it's like, hey, I already know what I'm talking about.
This is how I feel.
Right, exactly. And Leila has CPTSD, which is it's a version of PTSD, but it's more complex. But yeah, so we're seeing the beginnings of what's going to become sort of a bigger problem for him, and it's already starting to become a problem because he's starting to make mistakes and make rash decisions because of the PTSD and because of the trauma, and the people around him are sort of noticing this change in him and not really sure like what to do about it or anything like that. But at the same time, I wanted to make sure that a lot of people they write PTSD as like you become this raging monster and it's it's only because you were in the war and it's like I hear gunshots and now I'm a monster, So it was very important to me to write it realistically, which is that Tobias is still the same person. He's just dealing with trauma, and so he's still this nice, guy. He's still this man who loves his mother and sister and his, fiance. He's still a very loyal person, but it has affected, the way he experiences the world around him, the way, he has trauma responses now, basically. It hasn't changed who he is as a human. It's changed how he experiences the world around him.
Yeah, and did you find it hard to kind of balance? Okay, of course, this is a romance book, right? A romanticy book. Did you find it hard to balance that, like getting, doing the personal, Tobias story, but also having to fit the romance in there for if nothing else, for the readers, because they love your romance writing.
Oh, thank you. No, the romance for me is always the easiest part. So balancing all that for me, that's something that I tackle in the outline. If you read How to Write Romantasy, I talk about every book in a series should have an intimacy destination, and basically every romantic moment needs to lead up to that. The intimacy destination is going to be like the biggest moment of intimacy, that whether it's emotional or physical, that the characters have never experienced yet, and you need one for every book in the series. So for a lot of books, it might be like the intimacy destination of the first book is the first kiss, and then the second book is the first I love you, and the third book is them getting engaged or something like that, So the intimacy destination for this book was the first time that they have penetrative sex. and so it was fun writing the romantic moments because everything sort of leads up to that moment. And his evolution as a human being affects the romance. So these things sort of go hand in hand, like Leila and Tobias have conversations about, hey, Leila's noticing that Tobias is really festering in all these negative emotions. So they're having these intimate conversations where she's like, you can talk to me, like lean on me. I want to be there for you. So a lot of, and I guess in some ways, like I said, I have CPTSD in my real life. And, my husband and I have lots of conversations about like the trauma and how we can be there for each other. And so in some ways, like that's reflected in the work where a lot of their arc and growth is relevant to the romance. So a lot of the intimate moments between them is sort of trauma informed. So it's sort of them, like checking in with each other. There's a moment where Leila is very traumatized after a thing that happens, and I don't want to say because of spoilers. And Tobias gives her space at first because she needs the space, and then afterwards he checks in with her, and they have this like back and forth, and he asks her like, "What do you need from me? Like, what can I do?" So I would say it wasn't hard to balance because these things affect one another. If you have PTSD and you're in a relationship, it's going to affect the relationship, and your partner can either be a huge douche about it, or they could be supportive and like help each other out.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's, and that's the one thing. I mean, I don't know how much you take from your actual, real life relationship, but I do work a lot of that into my stories, and people will ping that out. They're like, that was you and your wife, wasn't it? Like, conversation. I'm like, yeah, because I just think I think, certain quirks and stuff between, couples are fun. And I think people think they're hilarious. So I just kind of put them in from time to time. Did you do the same thing with your books?
I don't like people always ask like, oh, is this character based off of Cliff? I will never base a character off of Cliff.
Off of a person.
Yeah,
sure.
I'm very much like, I don't need to share him. Okay, you guys can have Tobias. This guy, Cliff is mine.
Yeah, that's right.
But I wouldn't say I like intentionally pull from my relationship, but there are things where I write it and later on I'm like, oh yeah, like this is kind of like me and Cliff, like I mentioned how like, Tobias and Leila check in with each other about their trauma, and they make sure that they have like a healthy communication, especially because in the first two books, their communication was not on point. And so they're sort of like vowing to be like, okay, we're not going to make those mistakes, So there are definitely, I would say there are similarities. I wouldn't say that I intentionally pulled from them, but I would definitely say I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of like me and Cliff. Like we do that too. And I would say that a lot of what I pull is more so like like, for example, there's a character, Naomi, who has a spinal cord injury. I got a lot of that information from Cliff because he has a spinal cord injury. That wasn't so much about me being like, I want to put my experience into it. That was sheer laziness. Like I knew she needed to have an injury. And I was like, well, here's an injury I know a lot about. And I don't have to do research for. So we're going to give her this injury. So a lot of what I pull from my real life is more like, I know this stuff. So I'm going to write it.
Yeah, way easy. It's like you're like, I just saved myself an hour and a half of research.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, here's a fun question. If you had to live in the Savior's Serious World setting, where would you live, and what would you do?
I feel like I'd have to live in Thesson because Kovar is cold, and I'm from California. Like I can't, if it's in the 60s, I'm freezing, you know, so I'd be screwed. Even though Kovar probably has one of the better societies, I'd be screwed if I lived there. Although they are like the warrior realm, so I'd be screwed either way because I'm not strong or any of that. Trigolia is kind of, it's sort of the most corrupt world or corrupt realm. Ethua is the most conservative and strict, so I'd be screwed there as well. So I would say Thesson post everything that's going on in this. Once the Savior's War is over, then I would be
then we can go.
Right, when they're rebuilding their society and things are getting better, then maybe like Cliff could visit the Savior and she could help heal some of his problems, you know, like it just seems like that. And it's a hot realm. I like the hot weather. Outside of that, I think it could be cool to live in the Outlands. This is what is referred to the area of their world that they are not super familiar with. There's not a lot of like traveling and immigration there because usually when people go there, they don't return. I know things about the Outlands that the characters don't know, but one of the things I do know, and it is hinted at in the series, so if this is a spoiler, sorry guys, the foreshadowing was there. But the Thessians believe that the Savior is the only magical being in the world. They are incorrect. The Outlands is filled with magical creatures, you know, dragons, sea monsters, all that stuff. It's filled with magic, and that's part of the reason why people go there and they don't return is because there's a lot of magical stuff that could kill you. Exactly. So even though it's dangerous, I think it could be cool to live there because then I get to see all the cool magical stuff, you know.
I love that. I love that. Now, in romantasy books, I've read. It's actually funny. Ever since I've read The Savior's Champion, my romantasy reading has gone up a little bit just to try to, know, because I like to know a little bit about everything. And only a few of romantasy books really get the villain correct because they're focused mainly on the love story, which is they should be in a romantasy. How did you make sure that your villains, stayed, imposing and scary, I guess you could say?
I based Rondice very much off of real world villains. He's, a lot of villains that we see in fiction, it's like, oh, they had this hard life and they're traumatized and they're like, avenging this horrible stuff that happened to them. And I'm not saying that can't be the case, but when we look at history, a lot of the villains, they came from a perfectly fine background. Some of them are even wealthy. It's a lot of entitlement and greed. It's a lot of a lack of empathy. It's a lot of, I deserve this because I exist. And just, I want more, and I don't care what happens. The ends justify the means. Like, I don't care what happens along the way. So I very much drew from real life villains, like the people that we read about in history class, and I feel like that's what made him work, is because this is someone that we see on TV all the time. This is someone like in the real, this is someone we see on the news, so it's like, he didn't have a hard upbringing. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He's entitled, and he is doing this because he can. He wants to own it all, and I feel like that's what made it realistic, at least to me. Those are my favorite kind of villains because they feel so realistic, and I feel like it's easy to write because this is, like I said, we've seen it how many times in history, like
over and over, right?
Sorry, Lefty Saurus, silver spoon in his eyeball. And I really enjoy writing the villains. It's sort of like with the villains, you get to write all the things that, like, you get to explore like that dark side of your mind that it's like, I would never do this, but I'm gonna put it in.
This is how I would do it.
Right. So I have a lot of fun with them, especially their dialogue and the things they say, and I love that stuff. I love writing all the dark and gritty details of the story. So it's a combination of pulling from the real world and just having fun being a little bit evil.
Sometimes you got to be maniacal, right? It's just it just feels good every so often,
right?
Now you are known for putting your characters through the ringer. Was there a scene in this in the Savior's Army that you were like, that's a little mean, even for me? Without spoiling, of course, but
Okay. So I wouldn't even say that okay, I'm trying to think of a way to word it without spoiling. There are a few scenes. Okay, so there are these fast forward scenes that like you get a look at what's going to happen in the future, and then you go back to the normal timeline, so people get to see how badly things are going to end up while they're on their way. And some of these fast forward scenes, I knew I had to do it, it's not that I felt bad writing it, but I was writing it like, oh, readers are going to be so mad at me, like, oh, and then, I had readers who are totally fine with dark fantasy, and have read lots of gore. And they're like, Jenna, I had to skim this because it was too much. And I'm like, I'm not sorry, but I'm sorry, I guess, So there are moments where
I hurt you so bad. I mean,
yeah, I'm just like, let's just say poor Tobias. He goes through it in this book, and I just keep telling myself it's okay. You get the girl at the end, and you're gonna have a happily ever after. It's fine. Okay, it'll be worth it in the end. Just it'll be okay. And I kept like my readers, like my beta readers, would be like, Jenna, how could you? I'm like, it's okay. He gets laid in this book. Okay, he gets laid. The scales are gonna balance.
We'll balance it out. We'll balance it out. Oh my gosh.
Exactly.
Well, I was just, it's funny they kind of led right into that. Right into my next question. I was going to ask you, it's like, when you're writing these intimate scenes, sometimes people will fall into the trap of like, okay, well, we're having these two characters hook up, but the reader's like, but there's like bombs going off around you. Well, how? You must really be, really be needing it right now because there's a bomb that just dropped outside your window. Like how do you make sure that you don't fall into those traps?
It's all about pacing and finding the appropriate moments. That's another thing is like, especially in romantasy, we see a lot of like, they've been traveling for weeks on end on horseback and now they're having sex against a tree. And it's like, first of all, against a tree sounds painful. And second, have they not bathed? Like this is gonna be the stinkiest sex ever. This is gross, and I mean, like, I can't read it and be like, ooh, this is hot. I'm reading it just like, oh,
you're just like, what, sweat just running down your back for the last 2 hours,
right? And I'm just thinking about like all the bugs on the tree and the bark. It's gross. But anyway, so I'm one of those people where I can't not remember that. I can't, like, suspend my disbelief. And so while I'm writing these scenes, I'm very cognizant of, okay, they just had a shower. Like now is a good time. Like they just had a bath, Okay, they're resting in an inn. So it was very much about pacing in the story of being like, okay, they have a bed. I can add an intimate scene here. They've had a bath. We were talking about how Leila's hair is wet. That means she is bathed. Like, and they have a bed. So it's very much I work in the pacing of the scene where it's like they're in sort of a softer moment, and just throwing it out there, like, you don't, like, if you want to write these sex scenes, they don't have to be in a bed. I'm just one of those people where it's like, especially because my characters are inexperienced, I don't want their first time to be in the woods, like give them a comfortable bed. Okay. Let them figure it out. So it's just very much about finding those pockets in the story where, because they're on the run. So in certain areas, they're staying at someone's, manor, or they're staying at a brothel, or there are moments where they're staying in the woods. Those are moments where they're not going to get busy, but then they're in an inn. So, okay, they can get busy here. So it was all about looking for the perfect opportunities, because like you said, like I know there's like this one really popular book where these two characters are having sex and in the background, they can hear the screams of people dying. And I'm just like, does that not kill the vibe for you? Like, I don't, I didn't want to be one of those authors where people are reading the sex scene and they're just like, this doesn't feel like the right vibe. This feels very uncomfortable.
Well, yeah, and that also leads into another genre that has essentially blown up in the last like 5 years, and that's dark romance. Like it's been around, but like now some of these books are the most popular books, like in the 2024, 2025, like the most sold books are some dark romance books, and they're actually even getting some TV shows, which the ones that I've heard, I don't know how they're going to make them into TV shows. Because I'm like, that is really gory and very sexually gross. I don't know how you're going to get away with that. But what is your view on dark romance? I know I've heard you talk a little bit about how you don't like certain things, or
Mhm.
what's your overall view of that genre as it's blown up?
I have mixed feelings because on the one hand, I'm glad that the genre exists. Excuse me. Because there's clearly an audience for it. And before, when you would read a romance book, you would just have to guess, is this going to go in a gross way or is it going to be sweet and have a happily ever after, you know? And
Yeah.
now, at least if it's labeled dark romance, I know this book isn't for me, it's for someone else, and I won't read it, you know? So, on the one hand, I'm always glad when labels exist because then the right people can find those books. And if that's for you, like, go crazy. It's just not for me. On the other hand, I do think there are like this is where I get like on the one hand, I'm like, it's reading, it's fantasy, like it's fiction, people are allowed to explore parts of themselves that maybe they wouldn't explore in real life. Like I do understand that, but on the other hand, there is something to be said about how art can normalize things and art
Yeah.
can change our brain chemistry, especially if younger people are reading this. There were a lot of people I've met who said that because they read Twilight, they ended up in abusive relationships because they thought because some certain things were presented as romantic when really they were signs of stalking and abuse, I mean, like, obviously dark romance isn't usually peddled toward younger people. So at least there's that. But there are parts of me that's like, do we really want to be normalizing this? Like, I understand that this is just like for a lot of people a sexual fantasy, and that they get to explore something that maybe they wouldn't want to explore in real life, but they're interested in reading about it in a book. So I understand in that way, but at the same time, it's like, is this something we really want to be normalizing or romanticizing? Because even adults can have their brain chemistry changed
True.
because of the art they ingest. So I have mixed feelings about it. I'm glad the label exists so that the right people can find it and the people like me can avoid it. And I do get that, like, I mean, like, there are thriller books where horrible things happen. But we don't read those books and go, okay, I'm going to be a murderer. But then at the same time, thriller books are not romanticizing it or making it seem like a good thing. It's like,
making it very intimate with these crazy things.
Exactly. So it's like I haven't settled on a firm opinion. I'm sort of like wishy-washy, where sometimes I'm like, well, some people are into it, good for them, and other times I'm like, well, what's the therapy bill going to look like later on because they got so sucked into it. So I don't know. That's where I'm at now.
Was there any scene that you had to cut from the Savior's Army that you really wanted to put in there but just didn't work?
There are, I wouldn't say full scenes, but whenever I go in the thought dumping phase, which is like brainstorming, I cook up a lot of, different ideas, and I cook up a lot of like conversations and streams of dialogue and things like that. And so there were conversations that didn't end up in the book, but I saved them because they might be relevant for the Savior's War. So I don't want to reveal any details because who knows if it'll end up in the Savior's War. And there was actually one conversation, I'm writing a rom-com right now, and there was one conversation where I was like, this actually fits my rom-com. I just have to tweak the language so it's like modern language, there weren't any full scenes that didn't end up in the book, but there were just, little blips of conversations and stuff, but I'm saving them just in case I need them for the Savior's War.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I was going to ask about how did the, the traditional publishing deal, how did that form for you, and why did you feel like this was the right move for this, at least this book?
That was totally just by chance. It was like in early January. I think I can't remember if it was 2024 or 2023. It was a while ago. And I got an email from 10 Speed Press, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. And they were like, it was an editor from 10 Speed Press. And she was like, hey, I read The Savior's Champion. I really loved it. I saw that you also write writing craft books. We were wondering if you had ever considered writing a book about how to write romantasy, since it's very on trend right now. And if so, would you like to write it through us? And I get lots of scam emails every day. So I thought this was a scam, because how often do publishing houses reach out to authors?
Yeah.
So I almost deleted it. And then I was like, well, you know, oh, thank you, Iona. I just saw the comment. I was like, well, you know, maybe it's real. So I sent the email to my assistant, was like, can you vet this to see if this is legit or not? And she wrote me back like, Jenna, this is legit. Like, oh my gosh, Jenna, this is real, you know? And I started, yeah, and I started freaking out and everything. I looked into it. They published, you know, Save the Cat writes a novel. They published that Marie Kondo book about, you know, saving, you know, like what sparks joy and everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And they published a bunch of books with Dolly Parton, and I was just freaking out, you know. So I wrote back and I said, actually, you know, and I told the truth. I was like, I have a list of nonfiction writing craft books I want to write, and How to Write Romanticities on the list. It wasn't going to be the next one I'm going to write, but I could bump it up for you, you know. And they said, okay, sure, you know, just we can. They're like, all we would need from you is to put together like a pitch of what like an outline of what you think the book would look like. You know, they were like, this would be 100% up to you. We're not going to tell you what to write, you know, just do you. So put together an outline, send it our way, and then we will put together a, you know, like a pitch or like a, you know, an advance, and, you know, have you take a look at it. And so I'm at the same time putting together this outline and also because I didn't have an agent, and I, you know, I don't want to negotiate this by myself. So I'm like pitching to agents. And fortunately, it was much quicker getting an agent because I already had an offer in hand. Yeah. So people are getting back to me really fast, like, okay, you know.
You already have it. All I have to do is do the dots and I's and T's. Great.
Exactly. So I got an agent. I sent them my outline and everything. They sent me the sample contract, and my agent negotiated it even better, you know, and that's basically how it all worked out. And it was one of those things where it was just like, I had always considered, my game plan had always been, I will become a hybrid author one day, which is like both both indie and traditional. Yeah. But it had been so far off my radar because indie had been working out so well for me. So I hadn't considered querying in a really long time, you know, because indie was going so well. But then this offer fell right in my lap, and it's like, well, might as well give it a shot. And honestly, it was just all going to depend on what they were willing to offer me in the contract. You know, if they were going to treat me like a newbie and give me a $10,000 advance, I wasn't going to do that because I could make more than $10,000 on my own on this book, you know. And I wanted to be treated like, you know, I've been around for a while, which I have. And they, you know, they were great. I had an amazing experience. Most of the people I know who've been traditionally published, they have a lot of gripes. I don't have any. I had a wonderful experience. My editor was amazing. My marketing team was amazing. They were all, you know, it was very much like I was in the driver's seat and they were just there to help me out. And I do think a lot of that is in part because, you know, I had a wonderful agent to negotiate everything and make sure that I retained as many rights as possible. I got to have the final say on the cover art, which is also not very common.
That's not common,
in traditional publishing. Like, it was very much like Jenna, like they sent samples. So like, which one do you like, Jenna? You know, I'm like, oh, I get to pick. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a great experience. It was very much it just fell in my lap. And I always, as grateful as I am for that, you know, and I'm happy to share that story. I always remind people that this is not normal. And so if you get an email from someone saying that they want to publish your book, vet it because the odds are 90% of the time it's going to be a vanity press. It's going to be fake. Yeah. I've gotten lots of vanity press emails. So that's why I thought this email was fake, you know? So I just like to warn people that 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be legit. I'm an exception to the rule. So you can hear my story and it's very exciting, but just understand it's not the norm. I don't want to normalize this and get other people in trouble.
This happens to everyone. No, it doesn't. No.
Yes. But since then now, you know, I have an agent. I've gotten, I don't know what I can say, but I have like translation deals in the works and stuff. And so now we're going fully hybrid. And from this point on, some are going to be traditional, some are going to be indie, you know.
Well, that was rolling. See, I love this. We're just rolling right into all the questions I was going to ask you, right? So I was going to ask you about, now that you have been traditionally published, and did that kind of spark you to do this writing course that you're going to be doing? And like, has it got your entrepreneur juices flowing more?
The writing course, this is another situation of I was actually contacted by YouTube, which again I thought was scam, because there's so many scam emails. It's all I always
Yeah,
am like, I always
get those
think the
from
worst.
YouTube all the time. Half of them are just complete junk, and the other half are like you have to jump through some hoops. And
Yes, exactly. I had been ignoring this person for like weeks, and then they hit me up on Instagram like, "Hi, I'm so sorry, but you haven't responded to my emails." And they're like, and that's when I was like, okay, maybe I should actually look into this, and it was real. But yeah, YouTube approached me. Basically, they have this new course feature where you can release courses on YouTube, and they want to get more people sort of involved. And so they were the ones who hit me up and were like, hey, you know, we will incentivize you to create a course, basically. And so I was like, well, you know, I already create courses. I have 3 available on Skillshare. Might as well have one on YouTube where that my whole audience is. And it's talking about stuff that I already make videos about. So it was a win-win for me. So yeah, I've been very fortunate. I've had a lot of opportunities fall in my lap somewhat recently. I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, that's what started that. And I've always kind of had an entrepreneurial spirit, but now that my husband's healthier, it's sort of like we're in go mode, and I get to explore all of these different avenues. I'm working on my very first rom-com. My agent is really curious about pitching this one traditionally. Normally I do fiction independently, but she's feeling really, really good about this one's odds in the traditional space. I'm not guaranteeing anything. It's all gonna, you know, I'm very much open to it could go indie or traditional. But yeah, it's definitely a new phase of my career, and it's been interesting because there's been a lot of opportunities and a lot of changes, and I'm just taking it like one step at a time.
yeah, I mean, yeah, it seems like there's a lot of opportunities and things that are coming your way and that you're making yourself. But you've been talking about this rom-com, and so is this kind of, I want to say, I'm trying to think of her name. Is it like, I know Ali Hazelwood, she does some stuff like that. Is this in
It's sort of, I mean, like, I wouldn't compare myself to Ali Hazelwood, but it's in that genre, that vibe. Oh no, you've frozen. I'm sorry. Maybe it's just me. Hold on. Okay, my internet's okay. Can anyone comment? Hold on. No, okay. So it's him. Okay. I'm sorry. I can do a little dance here. He froze, but Butters is here. Oh, hey.
Sorry, we all froze there for a second. I was like, no.
It's okay. I was like, here, Butters will do a dance while we
all right, yeah. So I don't know if you heard my last little rant before it kind of glitched out.
Oh no, I didn't. You were asking if it's sort of in the Ali Hazelwood vibe.
Yeah.
I said I wouldn't compare my books to hers, but it's like that sort of vibe. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any teasers that you can tell us about the story?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess, again, this is all in the drafting phase, so everything's subject to change. But this is very much, like I said, you know, there's a lot of trauma and darkness in the Savior series. And so I was very interested in writing something that's light and funny and fluffy. What I can say is it is very much a fake fiance situation. Fake dating, fake fiancés.
Oh, no.
One of my favorite tropes. So I'm just like, yes. But it's about, and it's going to have a lot of rep that is near and dear to my heart. You know, we've got an autistic leading lady, an ADHD leading man. They are both Latino, and we've got gray ace rep, we've got bisexual rep, and it's very much black cat, golden retriever vibe, if anyone is familiar. And it's, you know, we've got a woman who, she hates her job. She's not happy where she's at. She works in, you know, finance, and she's just miserable. And she very much, her dream is to work with animals. She wants to, you know, do a lot of sanctuary and fostering with animals and everything, and, you know, rehabilitation and finding homes for dogs and things like that. And then we've got the leading man who is in a financial bind, and he learns that his long lost father, who abandoned him before he was born, has left his inheritance to him. It hinges on the fact that he will be, you know, getting married and producing a progeny to continue the legacy. Nice. So he needs a fake fiance to get this money, and he's in a financial bind, so he can't wait for a real one. So he and the leading lady combine forces to try and get this money, so that he can get out of his situation. And for her so she can quit her job and create this animal sanctuary, and shenanigans ensue and people fall in love and there's cute little dogs, and we've got this three-legged dog named Fonzie, Arthur Fonzarelli.
No, no.
And it's very fun. I've been really enjoying writing it, and what I've been enjoying the most is this is shady and I shouldn't say this, but I find that a lot of rom-coms are lacking in the calm part, like they're not quite as funny as they should be. And I've been having a lot of fun writing funny moments into this one. So I hope this one will kind of change the vibe, and like you can actually laugh at this one. There's lots of good one-liners.
I'm looking forward to that. Now, since you're kind of expanding out into rom-coms, if you could cross over with one other author, who would you think who would you want to cross over with? And then who do you think would be like a good partner to cross over with?
See, I'm such a brat. I don't ever I'm very much a control freak. And the reason I got into writing is so that I could write my stories the way I want to, So like for me, crossing over with anyone, I'm just like, oh, that sounds like even like if it's one of the greats, it's like just sounds like a nightmare, because now I got to split ideas, and now I got to, even though like it would probably
agree on certain things.
Yeah. But the authors that I would agree to in a heartbeat are all dead, So like, Edgar Allan Poe and Maya Angelou, and they don't write anything like what I write. But if they were to,
that would be fun.
Yeah. For me,
it's just like would be amazing to write with.
Yeah, for me, it's like I just want to breathe the air that you're breathing.
Get some of that aura.
Right.
Yeah. Just let me walk by real quick and just take some of that aura with me.
It's like, I don't care. We could write, a fucking newspaper article. That's fine. Like, I just want to hang out and learn from you. So, but they're dead. So,
well, where are we going next here? I know it's the Savior's War, right? Mm-hmm. So, now the Savior's Army just came out, but do you have everything completely flushed out, or do you know exactly where we're going with this?
Yes and no. I had planned for this book to be at least or this series to be at least 4 books. But I do have an idea of how to make it 5 or 6. And so I'm like 90% sure that I'm going to end it at the Savior's War, but I'm one of those people where I don't like to like give myself like hard deadlines. Yeah. Unless like I'm 100% certain. So I know like how the Savior's War is going to go, but I haven't decided yet if I'm going to leave that little thing dangling to leave room for books 5 or 6. That is something I'm going to allow myself to decide as I write it. So yes and no. Like I know how it's going to work out, but I don't know if I'm going to close that chapter or not.
Yeah, one that kind of leads into like, are you ready for the Savior's series to be over? Or like sounds like it's because I've been kind of watching some of your stuff leading up, and it sounded like yes, but now it kind of sounds like you're not quite ready.
It's one of those things where like right now, because like I'm writing the rom-com and everything, like right now, especially after everything I went through, like it's I really love the Savior series and I'm very passionate about it, but writing it has become a lot, like writing for me is usually like fun and it's escapism, but writing the Savior's Army in particular was very tiring because it's a lot of hashing out trauma that I was dealing with in real life. So it's one of those things for like right now, writing the Savior series has become more laborious than it used to be. So if you were to ask me right now, it's like, yeah, I would be okay with ending the series, but I don't know if I'll still feel that way when I'm working on the Savior's War, because right now I'm taking a break to work on the rom-com. By the time I work on the Savior's War, I might be like right back in it, and that's why I don't like to give like final answers until I know for certain, because for me, my writing journey and the way I feel about my projects, it's always evolving. So I don't know, but once I'm finished with the rom-com, I might be like kind of over, all the cutesy stuff, and I might be like ready to stab some people, So if you were to ask me today, I would be like, yeah, I'm comfortable with ending the Savior series, but that might completely change while I'm writing the Savior's War. So that's why it's hard for me to say for certain.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of how I kind of felt like I have my own kind of series and I stay within that universe, but sometimes I'll just write little tidbits or something that's outside of my norm. Like I'll write some sci-fi stuff just a little bit. And then it's like, oh, the juices are flowing to go back into the fantasy world.
Right.
Yeah, because sometimes you can just like, you're like, and especially if you're having some rough stuff going on in your real life, you're just
Yeah.
like, it's hard to write hard stuff for other people to go through when I'm going through it sometimes, so I can completely understand that. But then I see how you're super excited about the rom-com and that, and the way you talk about the future of the Savior series sounds uplifting. Sounds like you're ready to keep going.
Yeah, it's one of those things like, where it all depends on how future Jenna feels, because it might just be that working on this rom-com was the break that I needed, and then I'll be ready to get back. Because the reason I've always liked writing bloodshed and all the dark stuff, because it's like you get to explore, that side of your mind that you don't really deal with in the real life, I hope, but when you're in a situation where like my husband almost died, so it's like now I'm writing about people almost dying. It's like, oh, well, this is actually something I did deal with in the real world. Like I write to escape, I want to escape into something that's different. And so when I was working on Savior's Army, I was escaping into something that was very similar to what I was going through, except there's a lot more stabbing in the Savior's Army, than what I was going through. But it's like, I was dealing with, life and death stakes in the real world. And now I'm writing about life and death stakes. So now, working on the rom-com, everything's all fluffy and light. And that might be the break I needed to, get back into the Savior's War and go back into the darkness. So it's really hard to say, but I always just say future Jenna will figure it out.
Well, before we get out of here, I would like for you to give aspiring writers, romantasy or fantasy, or if they want to just write nonfiction, what is a couple tips that you would give people if they're just starting on their journey?
Oh my goodness, there's so many things that I could say. Okay.
You can pick a couple.
My brain just, okay, well, be very aware of where you're getting advice from. The biggest mistakes I've ever made in my career were because I got advice from people who didn't know what they were talking about. There are a lot more people willing to give advice than there are people who are qualified to give advice. So for example, I took advice from someone I look back and I'm like, what were you thinking? I took advice from someone who knew what they were talking about because they designed a website for a New York Times bestseller. And I didn't know any writers. So I was like, okay, well, you knew this New York Times bestseller, you must know what you're talking about. But obviously all of his advice was horrible because all he did was design the guy's website. Be very mindful of where you're getting your advice. Be mindful of where you're getting your research. Watching a TV show with a character who has PTSD is not the same thing as researching actual PTSD. Things like that. Just be very, very mindful. Don't get your information from ChatGPT. That should go without saying. But, just be very mindful of where you're getting your information from. And it is important to do the research and everything. I would also encourage people to research the publishing industry while they're writing their first draft.
Yep.
Because researching the publishing industry can take a long time. And that way, by the time you're done with your first draft, you have an idea of what kind of publishing route you want to go down. And then the other piece of advice that I would give, it's not so much a piece of advice as it is, just a reassurance, is it's not just you. So people are always telling me like, oh, I feel really insecure when I write and I feel like it's crap. And I'm like, okay, well, so does everyone else, we all feel that way. And everyone thinks that all these bumps they're going through in the road are just them, that they're the only ones experiencing it. I'm the only one who thinks I'm a terrible writer. I'm the only one doubting myself. I'm the only one with imposter syndrome. I'm the only one who's stuck in the middle. This is all of us. We are all going through the same thing. All of the problems you are experiencing, Stephen King has experienced at some point. This is normal. So stop telling yourself that this isn't normal and that this is just a weird thing you're going through. The sooner you realize that we all hit those bumps in the road, we all made those mistakes, the easier it is to get through it, because you realize this is just a normal part of the process. I'm not some stupid idiot. It's just the way writing is, and it makes it easier to get through because you realize this isn't just me. Like this is just a part of the process, and that's okay.
Yes, 100%. And whenever, and I don't know if it's just the type of people who go into writing or into these creative spaces, but yeah, as soon as you start getting any kind of success, you start questioning yourself. You're like, who am I? Who am I to have success? You know, like I'm just a normal person. And yeah, like now people are contacting you for book deals and all these things. And you're like, no, I worked at this, you know, and that's the thing. I think, like you said, people just, you know, as long as you know that this happens to everybody, just keep going through it. So what can we expect next for you, whether it's YouTube wise or writing wise? What is the next thing we're going to see from Jenna?
Well, I do have my very first episode of my course releasing next week, and then the second episode will release the week after that. So we do have the course coming very soon. A lot of people have been asking about the Savior's Army audiobook, which has not been started yet. I'm working on it. I'm trying to figure that out. But right now I'm just working on the rom-com. That's like my main focus. And I'm guessing it'll be the next book that I publish, but I can't be 100% certain because I haven't decided which publishing route I'm going to take. And traditional publishing can be very slow. So who knows, maybe another book will sneak in before. I don't know. But that's the main thing, is mostly focusing on YouTube, getting the audiobook for the Savior's Army and working on this rom-com. And then it'll be time for the Savior's War.
Ooh. Well, Jenna, thank you so much for hopping on here and giving up your time and stuff and teaching people how to write books, and especially how to write romantasy, because I have a feeling there's a lot of new writers in that genre who could really use some help. And I think you could be the one that helps this next generation of romantasy writers write the good stuff.
It's my pleasure. And thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun, like usual.
Yes. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone who's watching. And we all know that the star of this whole thing was Buttercup.
Yes. She's